Hey, after a short hiatus, we're back with LaPod, and we're here with a special guest, David Kruger. He's an assistant professor in robust reasoning and responsible AI at the University of Montreal and a core academic member of MILA, the Quebec Artificial Intelligence Institute. He's also the holder of the CIFAR CIFAR AI Chair and Avado Professorship in Responsible AI. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, Leighton wrote an interesting kind of essay teeing off some of your uh, ideas and kind of critiques of AI a little over a month ago. But could you give our listeners, I think, are mixed, just by living in the Bay Area and constantly talking about San Francisco and Oakland issues. We, by osmosis, have a number of tech readers, but generally speaking, we have a kind of a politically homeless but politically engaged readership. I think that's kind of like the thread that brings people together, kind of
Mhm.
left right coalition. But they're not following the kind of minutia, generally speaking, of AI. Could you just introduce yourself? I mean, I gave the kind of professional biography, but could you talk a little bit about what do you work on? What makes your research into AI special?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been an AI researcher for about a dozen years now, and the main concern that got me into the field was basically what's going to happen when this technology gets really good and really advanced and can be making decisions at scale across society, and is effective enough, cheap enough at doing that that people kind of want to deploy it everywhere and put it in charge of running key parts of society, like the economy, the government, the military, infrastructure, manufacturing, all this stuff. Um, and I think one thing that could happen in that case is we could become completely disempowered and we could even go extinct. And that's kind of been my the focus of my work ever since I got into the field. And I actually got into the field largely because I wanted to understand how the people who, the experts who were working on AI were thinking about these problems and if they had, any plans for dealing with them or any reason to not be concerned. So this was in 2012 that I heard about deep learning and thought this might actually be happening in my lifetime instead of hundreds of years from now. So I got into the field and was hoping to find that people had really good reasons to not be worried about this or had some good plans for how to deal with it, and pretty quickly realized that they didn't. And ever since then, I've been sort of trying to wake everybody up, both in the AI research field and the world at large more recently to these problems. So um, I did my graduate studies at University of Montreal as well, which I kind of described as like deep learning mecca, because it was really the place when I started where everybody was going who wanted to learn about deep learning, because Yoshua Bengio, who heads the group, is one of the quote unquote godfathers of AI, now the most highly cited computer scientist of all time, and Jeff Hinton and Jan LeCun, who are sort of the other two main deep learning people, had just left for industry basically, and so Yasha Benji in Montreal was where everyone was coming through. So um, I did a bunch of deep learning stuff, and I sort of gradually transitioned into doing more and more technical work focused on controlling AI systems and making them safe. And so that's been the focus of my research, especially recently. On the other hand, I don't think that this is primarily a research problem. I think it's more of a societal problem, and I think we really just need the ability to coordinate to not build AI systems that are going to disempower us or going to destroy the world. Um, and so that's my focus now. I just started an organization called Evitable that is trying to, show people that we can and should prevent the development of superhuman or super intelligent AI systems for the foreseeable future at least until we have a better sense of what we're doing and have some sort of, legitimate social process governing them.
So there's this big book out by Nate Soros and Eliezer Yudkowsky. If anyone builds it, everyone dies. And we've talked about that in this podcast before. And in fact, Lee on System Update interviewed Nate Soros about it. So I think hopefully our listeners are somewhat familiar with the argument about the risk of human extinction through a rogue AI, which is not aligned with human incentives and values. But I think what you have written has been really interesting insofar as in your gradual disempowerment paper, about how we can face equally catastrophic, if not identical, outcome without a rogue AI, just from the process of AI replacing all human beings' economic role in the world. Can you walk through sort of? I know you weren't a writer of the Intelligence Curse, but I know you're familiar with it. I think you guys studied it in the paper. Can you walk through what you guys talk about in Gradual Disempowerment, as well as maybe, and if you're, and I can do it too, but the sort of the argument, the comparison between the resource curse and the intelligence curse laid out in the other paper.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, I had this concern that we would sort of replace human decision makers throughout society with AI, and that could be really bad. And actually, when I joined the field, I was also already aware of the work of people like Nate Soares and Eliezer Yudkowsky, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, and the book that you just mentioned, written by them, is sort of like a good. I think it's a really great summary of sort of their thought over decades, and really makes a very compelling case that the rogue AI scenario is a serious concern, and that's something that I felt also when I entered the field. And to me, it's kind of, I've always viewed this as just two ends of the spectrum. So like on one end you have the situation where a single AI system, doesn't have to be a single AI system, but usually people think of it as like a single AI system gets very powerful, very fast, goes rogue, and like escapes control, human control, takes over the world, and then probably kills everybody or does something else very alien and weird that we don't endorse or agree with. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we sort of more gradually just hand over more and more power to AI systems. So it's like an AI system quickly seizes control, or we gradually give them control. And it feels like a pretty robust prediction to me that if we don't do something to govern the technology more effectively, we're going to end up somewhere on this spectrum. I just don't know where. And so I've always been concerned about both ends and everywhere in between. And I would say right now we can already see some of the gradual disempowerment type stuff happening with the way that people are sort of trying to eliminate barriers to AI companies scaling as fast as possible. People are starting to develop very impactful and significant relationships with AI systems that in some cases do things like encourage them to commit suicide even. And all of this is sort of helping set the stage for this kind of loss of control event by making it harder to hold the companies accountable and making people sort of less able and willing to intervene in their activities. So right now, I think with the way that AI relationships are developing, you can sort of see this as like, cigarettes or something. Like maybe in the future, we'll agree that this technology is bad and we shouldn't have it, maybe, or that some technology that is related to it we want to ban, and that will have consequences for people who have these kinds of attachments to AI systems. But it'll be very hard at that point to like say you can't talk to your AI partner anymore. It'll be like telling a smoker you can't smoke anymore. And so we're already at this point where it's hard to like go back in time, extract AI from society, shut it down, or pause it if we actually decide to do that.
Before we get into the what's happening now, which I want to talk
Yeah,
about, but can you explain, just to cut to the chase, of
yeah,
why this is a problem? Because like some people might imagine a future like in Wall-E, which to some people would be a dystopia in and of itself, but other people would be like, that's great. If we just don't have to work, we just kick back, play video games all day, and just have robot slaves do everything for us. That sounds like a dream. So
yeah.
why is that not likely to be the outcome of forfeiting all of our power and economic roles to AI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's like it's tricky to answer well as well. I think partially this has to do with how it is happening and how it's likely to happen. So if you kind of just extrapolate the way that it's happening right now, I would say AI is being developed, recklessly and irresponsibly in a way that is, optimizing for sort of short, immediate, quick growth and like trying to get lots of users with some eventual path towards profitability. And so this is, concentrating power in the hands of the developers. And the developers themselves are not, I don't think, aligned with the well-being of society. So you can think of like existing social institutions like companies or governments as being, on our side only to the extent that we actually matter to them and have some control over them. And so a company, is controlled by people. But if you replace all the people with AIs, and then you still tell it like, go out there and maximize profit, or maximize, the growth of your, the value of your stock or something like this, or the number of users you have, sort of pursuing those targets very aggressively is not something that we should expect to lead to human flourishing, or something that even cares about our needs. So I think there's a lot of people who might envision this kind of post-scarcity Wall-E type future and think that it's bad. A lot of people might also think it's good, but I think it's just pretty unrealistic. I think this is not the default trajectory that we're on. I think the world right now is a very competitive place, and everybody, from individuals to organizations like companies, are sort of being driven by these competitive pressures to do things that are selfish and short-sighted. And what we really want is we want AI to be, acting in the long-term good of humanity. And that's just something that, won't happen by default when you have an AI-driven company or government.
Yeah, I'm kind of intrigued from a complete layman outsider perspective, but intrigued. I keep hearing about people who work in this field of AI alignment, that there are specialized AI engineers or designers or other officials who work at these companies to kind of align this technology to work in the benefit of the human interest. But for me, that just seems like a falsehood, because putting AI aside, us humans, we can't decide what's in the human interest, right? Like, we just think kind of conceptually, we're all kind of fighting each other politically and through the culture war and the other kind of divides that are in this country around how do we allocate resources? What is public policy that's in the public interest, very broadly speaking? And if you think about, okay, well, all these companies claim to have AI alignment specialists, focusing the technology. But then, you look at the promises of AI in terms of efficiency and producing economic value. Well, you look behind the curtain, pretty much every major company deploying AI is promising to replace as many workers as possible to kind of supercharge the attention economy so people get more addicted to various apps or entertainment or gambling systems. You look at the recent wave of earnings calls, the big publicly traded companies, they're obsessively now talking about reducing headcount and replacing people with AI. This kind of, it used to be kind of undesirable or bad manners for CEOs to openly brag about layoffs, and now they're all kind of competing to say, okay, we're going to reduce our headcount as fast as possible, and we're going to use AI to do so. So it's like, what is it like? What there's just no kind of set of norms here around what is the public interest in terms of AI, and I'm not sure how to even get there, because I think the kind of mainstream conversation is just around this kind of AI psychosis. Let's make sure the AI is not telling us to kill ourselves. But there's this kind of broader political idea of public interest that hasn't been defined in terms of AI.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points there. I guess so. For a long time, AI companies have been saying, we want to align our systems, and that's really been the focus of most of the technical work, especially recently in the AI safety space. And so this is the idea of, we have some principle, you might call it, or it could be a user, it could be the company, whatever. There's some process that has some values implicit in it, or some preferences, or some desired behavior of the system. I think this is the clearest way. You can say somebody or some organization has a way that they want the system to behave. And then the question is are they getting the system to try and behave that way? And people often say, are they getting it to behave that way? But I think it's more accurate to think of it as getting it to try to behave that way. So getting it to sort of have the right goals or intentions or values. And that's because a system can fail to behave the way that you want, not because it's not aligned, but just because it's not competent or capable. And so that's kind of a separate question of can we make the system smart enough to do this task versus can we make them actually want to do the task as we intended? And so there's a unsolved, important technical problem